Right now, California's largest reservoir is nearly full. Lake Shasta sits about 14 feet from the top, full for the fourth year in a row, holding close to 1.5 trillion gallons of water. On paper, the drought is over. But 4 years ago, this same lake was down to 40% of full, showing a drowned town, old railroad tunnels, and 124 feet of bare orange rock. Nothing about the mountains changed. Nothing about the rainfall was fixed. The only thing that changed was the weather. Lake Shasta is the largest reservoir in California. It holds 4.55 million acre-feet when it is full, held back by a wall of concrete 602 feet tall on the Sacramento River, about 10 miles north of the city of Redding. The lake finished filling in 1948, and it has been the heart of the Central Valley Project ever since. The federal water system that waters around 3 million acres of farmland and moves water more than 400 miles south, from the foot of the Cascades all the way to Bakersfield. By itself, this one reservoir holds about 41% of all the water stored in the whole Central Valley Project. When Shasta is full, the whole system breathes. When Shasta drops, the entire state feels it. And Shasta drops faster than almost any reservoir its size in the country. 2019 was the last year the lake was completely full before the crash. Then the rain stopped coming. By 2020, Northern California had slid into one of the driest stretches in its history. By the summer of 2021, the lake had fallen to around 38% of full, and the boat ramps at the marinas were ending in dry dirt instead of water. At the start of January of 2022, the top of the lake sat at 913 feet above sea level, more than 150 feet below full. That spring, Shasta topped out for the whole year at just 40% of full. It never climbed higher. Don Bader, the Northern California area manager for the United States Bureau of Reclamation, which runs Shasta Dam, put it plainly that summer. He said the lake was 124 feet down, and that it was a big loss of a lot of water. 124 feet. Picture a 12-story building standing on the old lake bed, and the water gone from the roof all the way down to the ground. The bathtub ring told the story from far away. A bright orange band of bare soil showed up along every shoreline, running for miles, sharp against the dark rock and the green tree line above it. You could see it from the road, you could see it from the air. It was the same mark the drought carved into Lake Mead, hundreds of miles away, and it meant the same thing. The water was far lower than it was ever meant to be. But here is the part that got lost in most of the drought coverage. As the water pulled back, it showed a world that had been underwater since before most people alive today were born. Old railroad tunnels came out of the hillsides. The Donny Creek Bridge, a road bridge up near Lakehead, rose back into daylight. A stretch of old highway came up from the mud, and a railroad trestle showed up just under the waterline. Even the base of a tower left over from the dam's own building came back once the water dropped about 90 feet. And deep in the flooded canyon, the ruins of a lost town began to show themselves. Before there was a lake, there was Kennett, California, a mining town on the Sacramento River with about 40 saloons, a hotel, a hospital, a schoolhouse, even an opera house. When Shasta Dam was finished and the water rose in the 1940s, Kennett went under, along with 7 other small towns: Baird, Copper City, Elmore, Eder, Morley, Pitt, and Winthrop. But long before any of those towns existed, this land belonged to the Winnemem-Wintu people, whose villages lined these same rivers for hundreds of years. When the dam went up, most of what was left of their homeland went under with Kennett. Hold on to that name. It comes back later in this story, in a fight that is happening right now. Kennett itself sits in the deepest, darkest part of the reservoir, buried as deep as 400 feet down. In a normal year, you would never know it was there. In the drought, people drove up to Lakehead and hiked out to touch pieces of a town that had been drowned for 3/4 of a century. Store clerks near the lake started giving directions to the tunnels. Most people saw those photos and thought the same thing: a bad drought, a shrinking reservoir, a slow collapse like the one playing out on the Colorado River. But Shasta is a different kind of animal, and this is the part almost nobody explains. Now zoom out. Lake Shasta sits at the top of the Sacramento Valley, where 3 rivers, the Sacramento, the McCloud, and the Pitt, come together behind the dam. The Pitt is actually the largest of them. The lake reaches more than 15 miles up the Sacramento arm and more than 21 miles up the Pitt, draining a basin of 6,665 square miles, about a quarter of the whole Sacramento River watershed. Those mountains catch an average of 62 inches of rain and snow a year. And here is what makes it swing so hard. The Bureau of Reclamation says about 90% of the water that flows into Lake Shasta comes from rain, not from melting snow. That one fact changes everything about how this lake acts. Most of the big western reservoirs are fed by snowpack. Snow falls in the winter, sits frozen on the peaks, and melts slowly across the spring and early summer, letting its water out on a schedule. It is a slow, steady drip that buys time. Shasta does not work that way. Shasta is less like a snowbank on a mountain and more like a rain barrel under a roof edge. When the storms come, it fills fast, sometimes faster than the people running it want. When the storms stop, there is no frozen backup waiting up high to feed it through the dry months. It just goes down. That is why Shasta can lose 150 feet in one bad stretch and win most of it back in a single wet winter. The barrel fills in the storm and empties in the drought, and there is very little in between. That is exactly what happened next. The winter of 2022 into 2023 was one of the wettest in California's recent history. A train of atmospheric rivers slammed into the state, and the snowpack across the Sierra and the southern Cascades climbed past 200% of average. The rain hit Shasta's watershed head-on, and the lake filled at a pace the Bureau had not seen in more than 10 years. By the end of May of 2023, Lake Shasta was at 98% of full. The orange ring was underwater again. Kennett was back in the dark. Then the swing went the other way. In early 2024, the storms came back so hard that by February, the Bureau said the reservoir was too high for that time of year and turned up the releases to as much as 7 times the winter baseline just to make room for the next storm and hold down the flood risk downstream. The same lake that had been 124 feet down and showing a ghost town in 2022 was now being drained on purpose because it was too full. That is the swing in a single sentence. Snowpack ran at or above average in 2023, 2024, and 2025. Shasta filled near the top in 2024, filled again in 2025, and in the spring of 2026, for the 4th year in a row, California's largest reservoir climbed to within about 14 feet of full. If you only look at the water sitting there today, you would think the crisis is behind us, but nothing deep down changed. The lake did not get more steady. The watershed did not start saving water like a snowpack. 4 good winters landed in a row, and 4 good winters is weather, not a fix. The same barrel that filled in 4 wet years can empty in 1 dry stretch, the same way it did between 2019 and 2022. If you are finding this useful, subscribe. We cover water systems, droughts, and earth science stories like this one every week, with the full picture you need to actually follow what is going on. By the summer of 2026, the lake is high and the marinas are busy, but the people who actually run Shasta are not watching the surface. They are watching what the water is doing for everything downstream, because a full Shasta means far more than a pretty mountain lake. Pull the water down, and a chain breaks the length of California, in a set order. First, the fish. When Shasta Dam went up in the 1940s, it cut off the winter-run Chinook salmon from the cold, spring-fed headwaters where they used to spawn. The dam that ended their old life now runs their new one. Winter-run Chinook are close to vanishing for good, and they live today by spawning in the stretch of the Sacramento River just below Keswick Dam, the smaller catch dam right beneath Shasta. Living on the cold water the reservoir lets out. Their eggs need water colder than 56 degrees through the summer, or they do not survive in the gravel. To hold that temperature, the Bureau built an $80 million, 9,000-ton temperature control device on the upstream face of the dam back in 1997. It has gates at 720, 800, 900, and 1,000 feet of height, so the operators can pull water from different depths and mix it to hit the right temperature coming out of the dam. When the lake is full, there is a deep pool of cold water down low to pull from. When the lake is low, that cold pool shrinks, the water warms, and the eggs cook in the riverbed. In the drought years of 2014, 2015, and again from 2020 on, the cold water ran short and winter-run egg survival fell apart. A full Shasta is the difference between a run of endangered salmon and a stretch of warm, empty gravel. Second, the area right at the dam. The city of Redding, 10 miles downstream, is the largest town served by the Shasta division, and part of its money comes from the lake, from tourism and boating. When the water drops, the houseboats have to be dragged out into the shrinking lake, boat ramps close, and marinas spend weeks pushing their docks farther out just to keep reaching water. Third, the farms. Shasta is the heart of the Central Valley Project, which sends out around 5 million acre-feet of water in a normal year, enough to water about 3 million acres, roughly 1/3 of all the watered farmland in California. This is not just a local number. The Central Valley grows a quarter of the food on the nation's tables. When Shasta ran low in 2022, federal water users across the valley were cut to a small part of their normal water, and fields that had grown food for lifetimes went brown. Fourth, the cities. That same project carries water hundreds of miles from the dam. The Santa Clara Valley Water District in the Bay Area pulls Central Valley Project water for an area of close to 2 million people. Water that starts as rain on the mountains above Redding can end up in a tap in San Jose or on a field near Bakersfield, 400 miles to the south. Fifth, the power. 5 generators sit at the base of Shasta Dam, and the Central Valley Project as a whole makes more than 5 billion kilowatt hours of electricity in an average year. Less water in the lake means less force driving those turbines and less power flowing into the system in the middle of a hot California summer, exactly when the state needs it most. One lake, one wall of concrete near a town most of the state has never visited, holding up salmon, cities, farms, and power lines from the Cascades all the way to the Tehachapis. And the system is even more tied together than that. Shasta does not stand alone. To the west, water is pulled out of the Trinity River basin, sent through mountain tunnels, and dropped into the Sacramento River just below the dam at Keswick, holding up the same flows Shasta feeds. When the reservoir ran low, the whole machine leaned harder on that brought-in Trinity water. The lake that looks so simple from the road is the anchor point of one of the most built-up rivers on Earth. Which brings us to the fight happening right now, and the name I told you to remember. For decades, the answer to Shasta's swings has been the same idea: build a bigger barrel. The plan is to raise the 602-foot dam by 18.5 feet. That is only about 3% taller, but it would add 634,000 acre-feet of storage, roughly a 14% jump, which the Interior Department says is enough water to supply around 2.5 million people for a year. There is history behind that number. When the dam was first drawn up in the 1930s, it was meant to stand about 800 feet tall. World War II drained the workers and the materials, and some of the generators meant for Shasta were shipped off to Grand Coulee Dam in Washington to power aluminum plants in the Northwest. So the dam was cut down to 602 feet. It was always meant to be bigger, and the people who want to raise it have been trying since the 1980s. Congress ordered studies in the 1980s, and again in 2004. It set aside $20 million for design work in 2018. The Trump administration finished the environmental plan in 2020, and in 2025, a new federal spending package put another $40 million toward planning. Backers, led by the Westlands Water District that serves San Joaquin Valley farmers, say a taller dam catches more water in wet years and, by holding a deeper reservoir, keeps a bigger pool of cold water for the very salmon the dam put at risk. More water for people, they say, and more cold water for fish. But the project has been stuck for years, and this is where the rain barrel comes back to bite. Critics point out that raising the dam does not make more water fall from the sky. It only adds room to store what the rivers already carry, and a bigger reservoir would rarely fill, because the river flow does not change. By one federal guess, the raise would add only about 51,300 acre-feet of steady water a year, less than a 1% bump for water users, which a policy expert at the group Friends of the River called decimal dust. Then there is the ground it would flood. Raising the pool would cover another stretch of the McCloud River, which California guards under its Wild and Scenic Rivers Act, and the state went to court in 2019 to block Westlands from helping build it. And it would drown much of what little land the Winnemem-Wintu have left, the same people whose homeland went under when the dam was built the first time. For them, this is not a policy debate about acre-feet. It is the second flooding of the same sacred ground. So California's biggest reservoir sits at the center of a fight over whether the fix for a barrel that empties too fast is simply a taller barrel, one that would rarely be full and would cost as much as $2 billion, while flooding a wild river and a people's last ground to gain water that adds up to a rounding error. And this is not the first time Shasta has swung this hard. Go back to 1977. That year, the lake fell to its all-time low, 230 feet below its top, the worst it has ever looked. It seemed like the bottom had dropped out for good. Then one wet winter came, and the very next year the lake was nearly full again, down to the floor and back to the ceiling in a single turn of the weather. That is the pattern. Shasta has always been a lake that lives between two far ends, and those far ends have not gotten any softer. The fullness of 2026 feels like it will last. But it is only one good run of storms that has not been tested yet by a bad one. So the questions hang over a lake that looks, for the moment, completely fine. How many dry winters in a row would it take to pull Shasta back down to 40%? And does the state have a plan for the summer that would follow? What happens to the winter run Chinook the next time the cold pool runs out, in a run that is already hanging on below the dam by a thread? If about 90% of the water that fills this reservoir comes as rain, what happens as those storms get harder to count on, dumping all at once or skipping years? And does it make sense to spend $2 billion raising a dam that would rarely fill on top of the ground of a people who already lost it once? Nobody can answer those yet. The data does not say. What the data does say is that this lake has emptied fast before, more than once, and that nothing about how it works has changed. For now, Lake Shasta sits near the top, 14 feet from full, the orange ring hidden somewhere just under the waterline. But the lake hit its high mark for the year in late spring, and from here, the only direction is down. Every day through the summer, the water pulls back a little more from the rock. Every day, the pale line where the ring will come back creeps a little closer to the surface. The barrel is full, the rains are done until October, and the water is already starting to fall.